Well, thank you very much for the invitation from Canning House. I'm delighted to be here. From Colombia, as said, with some experience in the region and having enjoyed living here in the UK for a few years. So I would like to share with you an overview. I'm not going to get technical at all, although some of the videos may look technical, but basically messages what we will be focusing on, trying to elaborate on the concept of el tiempo de América Latina es ahora, ¿sí? Latin American land of opportunity. I'll go quickly. The introduction by the economists has been a good overview, so that I will just focus on the outlook for investment opportunities in Latin America on the energy side, and the kind of evolving business environment for energy, with some examples of some countries, also talking a little bit about the exposure there, and the relationship between the international companies and the national oil companies will have been one of the issues in several countries, and hopefully coming to some conclusions. In terms of Latin America in the world context, I think it's important to highlight that the pattern of consumption and production of the different sources of energy is changing, is evolving, and Latin America has a tremendous wealth in terms of most of those sources of energy. As highlighted earlier, the business environment is evolving and is very much welcoming the need of resources or the arrival of resources that is needed in order to be able to unleash that potential. In the past, it was easy to talk about the lost decade of Latin America, or the Mañana syndrome. We believe certainly that Latin America is moving towards being a reliable place for investment, a reliable source of energy for supply for the world. But the challenge, of course, is to be able to grow, not only on economical terms based on these resources, but providing social prosperity. And the investor have to earn what is now called the social license to operate in those countries, which is perhaps the most significant challenge. I'm going to dwell with this. Latin America grew, this only last year, grew on average more than the developed regions, and with a much lesser effect from the crisis. In terms of Latin America as a consuming area of the different sources of energy, this is in BTU units of energy consumption. The world has that pattern, in which petroleum, natural gas, and surprisingly coal going up in world terms on consumption. Nuclear is still playing a role despite all the ups and downs, and hydro and the rest, the alternative sources, moving very slowly, very on a very insignificant percentage of the total thing. But of course, the big question is in the longer run, whether because of all the pressures on climate change, etc., that will develop. But there's basically a logic of the economics there. Despite of the high prices for hydrocarbons and fossil fuels, still the alternative energy is moving very, very slowly. If we contrast that with the internal consumption in Latin America, important to highlight that on coal is very small, despite of the fact that Latin America has a substantial reserves production of coal, and Colombia being one of the most important coal exporters, and hydro. It's a lot of water, a lot of mountains in Latin America, so hydropower is a very significant source of electricity, which the message here is that Colombia, as an example, I'll come back to that, but Latin America in general is very large on resources, relatively small in internal consumption in some of those resources. As such, the potential for supply to the world is very high. But even in biofuels, the potential in Latin America is very significant. Speaker later will talk in more detail about that. If we have a quick look in terms of current production and the outlook for the medium term, you will see that a country like Mexico is losing production, although trend is changing a little bit the last year. The main growth, the upper graph, is basically total numbers of production, which means that for oil, the whole of Latin America is producing around the same figure as Saudi Arabia, for instance. It's near 90 million barrels a day. But the growth, net growth, which is the lower part of the graph, is basically coming from Brazil, from the deep offshore, and Colombia, who is a new player, a much smaller scale, but growing very quickly. And some countries are losing production, and we'll see now in contrast the situation in terms of reserves. But to watch out is, of course, Venezuela, for instance. The figure of Venezuela, the official figure still talks about over 3 million barrels a day, but even the OPEC figures talk about probably closer to 2.2, 2.3. And the potential of Venezuela, of course, Venezuela could be producing 2 or 3 times as much. And Mexico is a case, and Argentina used to be a reliable supplier to next door Chile and lost that position, and actually Argentina is now reviewing very, very carefully their energy policies, because otherwise it could become a net importer of energy, despite the fact that they have reserve potential. This is the reserves for potential reserve for oil. The figure doesn't show very well there, but you look at Venezuela. The figure in Venezuela, taking into account the last additions or reclassification the PDVSA and the Venezuela government did, the total reserve of Venezuela will be in the order of over 200 billion barrels of oil, moving from something like 60, 65, which is a hell of a lot. And that is mostly coming from the Orinoco oil belt. That would be higher than Saudi Arabia. And in gas, despite of the fact that the production of gas in Venezuela is low, and in fact Venezuela is importing gas from Colombia, the potential of Venezuelan gas is also huge. But to contrast that, the figure of Venezuela, for instance, Brazil, which with the new developments in the offshore, which is very significant, and certainly is a total new frontier for developing an investment. Brazil is in the order of 14, 15 billion and growing. In contrast with over 200 Venezuela, you see the order of magnitude. Colombia, which is moving from a declining trend into a growing trend thanks to the new policies of the last several years, the last governments. Colombia is, in terms of production, moving to 1 million barrels a day, which is significant also in gas, coming from half of it in a very short period of time. Peru, Bolivia, Ecuador, the question is whether the overall government policies will allow to unleash that potential. Venezuela, huge share, a lot of potential, but the question is when and how. And Argentina is facing that reality, and I think that there will be some new policies coming into it, because Argentina is considered a significant resource holder as well. Trinidad and Tobago, which is this small island next to Venezuela, is a very interesting case. It's a country rich in gas. It's just the same kind of basin as Venezuela, in the mouth of the Orinoco River. And Trinidad and Tobago developed the gas resource that they had in a record time. It's a very important net exporter of LNG, and a good example for the slow pace of some of the neighbors who take decades to develop the resource, while Trinidad and Tobago have done that in an excellent manner. But in general, the message here is, with some ups and downs, huge reserve base, and some countries moving up very fast, others still sitting on the resource and considering the options. I will not dwell on that. On gas, I think that this is a couple of messages here, that despite of the fact that potentially Latin America has a lot of resources to be developed, those are being developed relatively slowly, and if the region doesn't do something quickly, could become deficit side, as has happened, as I said, Argentina and also Mexico. Mexico was exporting for several years gas to the US, and now Mexico is importing gas, including LNG from Nigeria. But the potential is there. Mexico has a huge area in the Gulf of Mexico. And when you look from a satellite map, you see the border of the country waters between the US and Mexico. And the US Gulf is full of spots, thousands of wells producing. South of the border is almost nothing. So it's a huge area there to be explored and produced. And sooner or later, Mexico will tackle that. It's happening, but slowly. And on top of the traditional gas, as we know it, natural gas, there is this potential coming up from the so-called unconventional gas reserve, which is the shale gas, which is basically gas and also liquids trapped deep down in the underground in kind of a stone. That was very difficult with the traditional technology to make it produce it. With new technologies, the US is already moving very fast. The areas on your right, in the dark and red, show the basins in which this shale gas is trapped. With new technologies, fracturing the reservoir and horizontal wells, is now adding a significant supply of gas in the US had not only improved the balance of supply and demand for the US, but also has depressed the gas prices significantly. And many of the projects for LNG of importing gas into the US have been canceled or postponed because of this new source. Well, the news is that in Latin America we are also looking into that. And you see Brazil, Argentina, probably all that area of the Mato Grosso and up. But also in Colombia, the potential is very significant. So there will be this unconventional and non-conventional gas resource also to be developed. And for that, capital is needed and technology. Another challenge requiring capital and technology is represented in this two graphs. You see this cake, and it's the total amount of heavy oil and extra heavy oil being held in the world, of which half of it is in Latin America. Also that in the recent developments over the years, there have been a lot of deals, companies joining the exploration and production industry, coming up, starting up. And Colombia perhaps is the case I know best. We have about 120 companies active in Colombia, many of them tiny, middle-sized, very successful. And of course what is happening and is expected, there will be a lot of consolidation and a lot of merchant acquisition in that process as the resources is identified and then significant capital is needed for development. So it's a very dynamic market in which technology is key and also creativity, handling options with capital. In the downstream, significant number of refinery projects adding capacity or upgrading refineries, all refineries bringing them to world standards in terms of environmental requirements all around the region that also are requiring investment and technology, and there are more to come on the downstream in general. If we have a quick overlook to the power supplies, this very rich subcontinent in energy resources has in several countries problems of demand of electricity, blackout, brownouts. Venezuela is one case, but it's not the only one. There is a crisis of power generation, which at the same time, of course, the normal question is how come? And there is where, again, opportunities come to tackle that. In one way or the other is perhaps a matter of public policy, mismanagement. Nationalizing everything has been proven in several regions, including several examples in Venezuela. And when the state presence is so heavy, inefficiency is the common denominator. And I think that is behind this. In other cases, it's lack of resources, and also growth in demand, which moves ahead the capacity of the investment to produce the supplies. But when you look at this is being tackled, is going to be resolved, and will require a lot of investment. And what this is generating as well is a new sector, a new activity in Latin America, particularly in the northern part of South America, in which transmission companies and export of electricity, instead of exporting hydrocarbon molecules, exporting electrons. And there are 2 or 3 key multinational companies from Latin America based taking electricity to neighboring countries. And again, in Colombia, a couple of good examples of that. And you will see a lot of interconnection in the region. And Central America and the Caribbean is asking for supply from the rich resource-based countries and also in power to reach out that part of the region. Biofuels, since that is going to be covered, I will not spend much time, but when you look at the map of the world, the party here started in Brazil, and Brazil is by far the most important player, although there are other players, including Europe, based on sugar beet. But the most significant production of biofuels is from sugarcane and soya bean in Brazil and Argentina. And Colombia is becoming a second largest producer of biodiesel and bioethanol in the region, thanks to also another very important resource, which is a renewable resource, land and agriculture. There is another front which is net exported to the region. Well, when you look taking advantage of the experience and looking forward, I borrowed this from a professor in Stanford University that gave a lecture recently in Colombia, and they had this triangle of as the main focus for designing an effective energy policy. But that triangle was missing the part in the center, social prosperity. It was too much focus in countries like the US, in which when you talk about energy security, it's basically to ensure that you have the supply, to ensure that the war in the Middle East doesn't disrupt the supply. In Latin America, perhaps the main issue for some countries is valid. You need to ensure supply, but it's more better to ensure that terrorism and violence doesn't affect the infrastructure. As a case in Colombia, that hopefully that is a matter of the past. But certainly the focus on the environmental protection, environmental sustainability in terms of the overall concept, the main focus has to be, and is being really given to benefit for the people, without ignoring the importance of having also an efficient use and consumption of energy domestically. You could take that to a more Latin American kind of debate, and I'm not going to go through all of that. But it's what I would suggest is a change of paradigm which is prevailing in the region. Probably the summary is the one at the bottom, and that is not a debate dilemma which is totally resolved in all countries, but in most. From ideological dogmatism, resources is ours, this is for our grandchildren, and foreign investment is going to steal and rob our resources, into the focus of really using the resource for the good of the people. And from inward looking into regional integration, and you can read that the different kind of contrast, which is happening, and I think that has allowed in several countries an approach which is forthcoming and that is welcoming private investment, local and foreign. Of course, you talk about, that is one thing that I was asked to refer to, and I'm not going to spend too much time there. As a private foreign investor, or even a foreign state-owned company investing in Latin America, what kind of risks you run? Well, companies have been nationalized in the region. Rules of the game have been changed, but things evolve. And of course, this is a very simplified look, but Venezuela, no doubt, is closing and closing. It's not closed totally. You see several companies with significant investment in Venezuela and hoping for better, and some messages from the Venezuelan government saying we are ready to renegotiate new terms, etc., as production declines, as technology is required. And a country like Brazil, after a significant arrival of investors and the development of all the deep offshore, this huge development and discovery in Brazil forced or led the Lula government to reconsider where the rules of the game have to be redesigned to accommodate the best interests of Brazil. And that sent some signals which affected in one way or the other the view that the investor had earlier. But in general, Brazil is a very open country to that, and you see a lot of companies coming there. Colombia I already referred to, and Mexico is the big question mark for the future. With, and we'll come back to Mexico in a second. So just to say that the landscape of risks shows a variety of situations. It's changing, but in general, as a common denominator, is more welcoming, more open, full of opportunities. There are a series of new rounds for exploration coming up. As highlighted, technology and capital is absolutely required, particularly in offshore heavy oil and conventional hydrocarbons. In power, there is quite a bit happening, and the other countries already mentioned. This is the challenge of ensuring the social license. We see that as prosperity starts to materialize in these countries, of course, the minorities or the less, the marginal population and communities start to ask for more. They want to have part of the share of the party as is natural. So we see a lot of pressures from minorities. Union activism is coming up, and companies have to be fully aware of the challenges in order to be successful. A lot of companies present already there. You see a long list of companies present in Latin America. And this is a new phenomenon as well. It's the Chinese national oil companies, 2 or 3 of them heavily involved in Latin America and paying significant amounts of money to get into the area like Brazil. But there are also Another source of capital, which is Canada, particularly in the northern part of Latin America. Some startup companies, which were extremely small a few years ago, and now, for instance, the first one, Pacific Rubiales, has Venezuelan management, by the way. It's a company that is producing already over 200,000 barrels a day in a matter of 3-4 years. You see several of them present there, which is a good example and a good case for the UK-based companies. You can start as a small or medium-sized companies and then take advantage of the opportunity you bring what is needed. The national oil companies are changing, evolving. Ecopetrol is an example and now has over 500,000 private shareholders. It's registered in the stock exchange in Wall Street, the New York exchange, and is growing quickly and expanding, also reaching out as an international, aiming at being a world-class company. Pemex, a case to watch, is being transformed little by little and is in bad need of a significant change. Otherwise, the company and the economy in general will be affected if this trend that starts to change in terms of decline production and decline reserves is not sustained. And Petrobras is already a success case. It's already a sizable company, a world-class company. And important to highlight that this is a model that inspired, in a way, Ecopetrol transformations. More than 50% of the equity of Petrobras is in private hands. Brazil, I don't spend there much time, but just to highlight that the new developments in Brazil are deep, deep offshore. Talking about over 2.2 thousand meters of water depth, which is really frontier development, and far from the coast. And the other message is that this is relatively recent. 10 years ago, Brazil was importing hydrocarbons. These days, Brazil is about to start to export more than 1 million barrels a day of oil. And in the Caribbean and the Pacific, very little will have been done in Latin America. So potential is there also for further development. Already mentioned Mexico, just to indicate that all the trends are down. And if that country is not open for technology and Pemex is not restructured to be a player like what happened with Petrobras or Ecopetrol, the country will run the risk of starting to be a net importer. Colombia, being my country, I already indicated that it's a bright spot in the region because it's open. The problem of the past has been very much put under control, and it's extremely open to newcomers. And it's a country rich in resources, including agriculture and coal, power generation, etc., and has very ambitious plans to continue growing. All the graphs are up, growing significantly in all indicators, in the energy side. And Colombia being at the crossroads, that upper part of Latin America, also has the ambition of being a kind of a hub for regional integration and transportation of oil, gas, electrons. So since the time is short, I would like to end with kind of conclusions. The sector is developing fast on most fronts, not on all, but in most fronts. The reserves of Latin America are increasingly important, some of them being developed. A significant part of that yet to be developed, depending on the policy adopted by different countries. This new frontier of unconventional resources could be a significant addition to the world supply, but Latin America as well. And they are full of a lot of opportunity on refining, on power, and biofuels. But to do that, as is the case in Mexico, is the case everywhere, you need capital and technology and management capabilities. Most of the countries are opening and ready to do alliances with international capital. And Latin America, a lot of opportunity now. I hope that this is a quick overview and ready to take questions in the Q&A side.